Hey everyone. Before we get to my interview with Zachary Kluckman, I want to say if you are a poet and want to be a guest on our show, maybe you have a book or a tour coming up, email me at rainy.mullen@gmail.com. That's rene.mullen@gmail.com. I'd love to have you on. You don't have to be a New Mexico poet or a performance poet. I love diversity. That's it. Now to my interview with Zachary Kluckman. I'm Rainey Mullen, and this is Pen and Poet. Intimate conversations and performances with poets, both page and stage, established and up and coming. A safe space where you can meet new artists, maybe gain an appreciation for the spoken and written word. This is poetry for the rest of us, the reachable, understandable, digestible poetry.
That night, Zapata washed my feet. Handlebar whiskers scratched the itch between my legs like myth.
On the days of our births, we breathe the dust of these memories, and it scours our flesh, smooths our skins, fills our lungs.
All the dead desire most is to live in our memory. All they desire most is to laugh and to dance.
I'm here with my guest, Zachary Kluckman. Zach is an award-winning poet named 2015 and 2016 Slam Organizer of the Year, 2014 Artist of the Year at the National Poetry Awards, has seen national slam stages as an individual and as part of a group including the Rumble Room team that went to SoFried Poetry Slam back in 2017, which he led 3 newbies, me, Robin, and Anna Martinez, of which, if you guys have been listening, you've heard them already, so now we've kind of made the set. Founding organizer of the 100,000 Poets for Change program, author of Persody poems, Animals in Our Flesh, Some of It Is Muscle, and one of the 4 poets in the Rumble Room Volume 1, which we've talked about a bunch already, and has published at least, I think you broke the 100 poems mark.
I did, just recently.
Yes, that is awesome. In various publications, you can hunt it down all over the place. And I don't think your website is up to date, but some of them are on there.
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you, Zach, for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and as with everybody, I'm going to have you start by reading or reciting a poem of your choice, be it from the book that I have sitting in front of me or anywhere, just so that we can kind of get a sense of who you are.
Sure thing. Yeah, no, that sounds great. I think I know that you've heard this poem a lot during our practices, but I don't know that it's been heard as widely, but it is still very much a favorite of mine. A poem that I wrote about what it means and looks like to be an ally in the current sort of socio-political environment, and doing it in a way that I hope is very genuine. Excellent. That would always be my hope for allies, of course. So the poem is called Said the Wolf to His God.
Ooh, I love this one. Yeah.
Said the wolf to his God, when you look at me now, with the blood of the moon still in my jowls, do you remember as a cub how I chased the sun through the rain? How I whined with desire to own the light with my teeth? I'm not sure if you're listening, but I need to explain how rain finally made sense of the light. The way it bends through a prism of water reveals, even to my limited sight, its nature is a unity of color. We are told this blending of hues creates a pure white radiance. What light creates is not white, only visible. Isn't this what every man wants? What every woman wants, to just be seen? Like any cub without a father, my heart listens hard for yours when the wind is in the trees. When the wind is your voice, heavy with things it will not say. The way light wraps around some bodies until they disappear. An absence only noticed by rain, by chalk and blood and tape. If death is a blind child looking for a hand to hold in the dark, why does she stand so often behind police lines? So often near bodies with dark skin? Why does it do this dressed in the robes of white wolves? I have grown to look like them, born with this coat, with the anger of 1,000 wet birds. I no longer chase my tail or bark at the sun, but I have howled as my dark-haired cousins are hunted for their skin. I am afraid that death will come for us all. Doesn't that make us allies in this fight? Said God to the wolf, hush, cub, you are not the one being hunted. That is your privilege wagging its tongue. Your words are an eraser in the hands of an artist who is uncomfortable with the work that he must do. When I made you, I named you with the sharp end of a bone, colored your fur with a handful of snow, and spoke 2 commands down your throats: love and speak. You cannot do one of these without doing the other. Now bark. Tell the white-skinned wolves who run in your pack how the light dies if one color goes missing from the prism. Ask them how they will cure their blindness when they have chewed the eyes from their skulls. Tell them they cannot spit me on the ground in their froth and their frenzy while spilling the blood of my children. Do not blame me for your hunger. I have watched you bite your gums for a taste of blood. Tell me, cub, when the men come again with their guns and call the white-skinned wolves to their side, whose throat will your jaws find? Said the wolf to his god, I will do as you have made me to do. I will stand with my dark-haired cousins and offer my blood to the moon, raise my voice to the wind and call all wolves to remember we are kin. When we see the gunmetal through the trees, we will stand and we will show them our teeth.
Awesome. I still love that one.
Thank you.
And so, since you've brought that one up and the concern that you have about its resonance with folks, I think, well, the last time I saw you do it publicly was at SoFried, and I'm curious to know if you got any feedback from the audience.
You know, that audience, I did get some. I mean, some people had some nice things to say about the poem. I don't know, I think given the nature of the room and the fact that there were so many amazing poems and poets in there, like everything was sort of widespread, right? But I did get some nice feedback. I will share that I did that poem at the Texas Grand Slam right after I wrote it as well. And that was the first place I ever read it. And in the room were a number of poets who I deeply, deeply admire from the Team Snow, the New Orleans Poetry Slam team.
Yeah.
A couple of whom are just absolutely brilliant poems that write about, their experiences, and they write brilliantly about everything. But they were poets I really admired, and they both came up afterwards and had some really nice things to say about the poem. Offered some feedback on it as members of the African American community.
Yeah.
They shared their thoughts on the poem, and that, in a sense, is exactly what I like. It's what I wanted to hear because, again, it's a poem about being an ally and trying to do that in a way that doesn't become a form of appropriation or a form of saying, this is about me, which I think unfortunately happens sometimes with allyship. And really trying to say, like, I have to recognize my own privilege, and I want to encourage other people who happen to be Caucasian to also recognize their privilege. So it's partly that call out to that, as well as a way of saying, like, my intention only and ever is to stand with people, not for them, not in place of them, but side by side with them in whatever way I can, even if that means being silent, which sometimes is the best way we can be allies, right? Yeah. But to get that feedback from these poets who I respected so much, and who have written powerful poems about those experiences, really was something that was very valuable to me and meant a lot to me as well. So I know that it has connected with people sometimes in strong ways, and that always feels good as a writer.
No, and I'm glad that you've gotten positive feedback, because I can't imagine many people taking that as appropriation by any stretch. And that's one of my 2 favorites of yours. That one and the holding your son's hand in public.
Thank you.
Which, if you have that one memorized, I still want to hear it before we finish, but if
sure.
not, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you do have 3 books. I only have, some of it is muscle here with me, because I am poor just like everybody else.
Amen, brother.
But I don't usually, when I talk about folks' books, I don't usually start with the first poem, because that seems a bit of a cop-out. Sure. Be like, yeah, I read your whole book. Let's start and only talk about this first poem. But I wanted to start here because, is it called a prose poem? Is it a narrative poem?
It would be a prose poem.
Prose. I've seen this become a bit more popular. Maybe it's just because I'm reading it more. And this particular one, Word Problems, seems to be kind of the first time I've read it in a way, read a poem of this style that seems to need to be written in this style.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of them just seem like short stories, which
Right.
are fine.
Mhm.
And that's what I tend to do, is write real short stories.
Sure.
But this is the first time I've seen it used in a way that was kind of necessary for that form, and I was hoping you could kind of chat about a bit about that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. I actually, I hadn't, before this point, I had not actually written a lot of prose poetry. You know, I've had friends who that's their preferred style. Of course, I've seen it like you and have read quite a bit of it, and it does seem to be growing in popularity. But this one definitely, you know, when I decided to write the poem, you know, it often starts sometimes with the idea of what you want to do in a poem, and this one was one that started with that. And I was actually reflecting on the word problems that they used to put on tests when you're a kid in grade school, right? You know,
Yeah.
a train is leaving at such and such, and how long will it take to run into Ronald McDonald or whatever, for strange, pointless questions they felt like. But I liked the idea of trying to write this poem in a form that would reflect that structure that they used in the test, you know, and so I wanted to write the poem as much like an actual word problem as I could, so that it became sort of a play on words, but also just a surprisingly challenging way to write a poem, trying to sort of adhere to some of those structures and that voice that I feel like those questions always had, right? You know, they always, I don't know, at least in my mind, when I hear a word problem in a test, I hear this like sort of weird teacher voice in my head. And so that was the voice I was tapping into to write the poem. And so I think that really guided most of the structure for this poem was, you know, was trying to create, you know, something that you might actually see on a, granted, rather bizarre test.
Yeah, and I have to say that, well, at least in here, and pretty fair across the board, that a lot of your poems tend to be about family
Mhm.
and about mental health. And just so that folks can kind of get a sense, I don't typically read. I'm going to say a lot of things that I don't normally do.
Sweet.
So I'm going to read the first couple of lines, because this one is about family, but you do include that whole train is going one way,
Right.
so many miles, and the other way. So the opening two lines are, one man who is an artist has 2 dreams and 4 children. The first dream of the artist is the multiplication of their dreams by an exponential factor of infinity. And it reads so kind of whimsical, but yet
Right.
goes really fast into some pretty darker
Mhm.
stuff. So yeah, no, I wanted folks to kind of, because like I said, this is the first time I've read it this style in a way that's like, nope, this had to be written this way. There's no other way to have pieced this poem together. So
you.
that was cool.
Appreciate that. I really do. It was a fun one to write. And yeah, I do, you know, especially at that point in my writing, I was doing a lot of stuff that sort of started off more whimsical or included some humor somewhere along the way, because, you know, I'm a big believer that we never feel one thing at a time, right?
Right.
Even in our, that's why phrases like pure joy always sort of send me into a little bit of a spiral. There's no such thing. Or if it is, it's very short-lived, right?
Yeah.
Because all the other complicating feelings are going to come into it right away. And that's just the human experience. But I love trying to incorporate that into a poem like that one, you know, and say, you know, we don't really feel one way about a thing, especially when it comes to difficulties in family or those people that are so close to us who have that magic button that they can press. They know exactly how to get to you, right? They're like, oh, I know your weakness, mother. Here we go. And so, you know, I love the duality. I love the fact that, you know, as people with relationships in our lives, whether they're familial or you know, romantic or what have you, everything is always in this dual state of being. It's like everything we do 2 ways at once, and that fascinates me.
Yeah, excellent. And let's see. As I was trying to piece together this interview, it dawned on me I actually don't know a lot of your background in poetry. Now, having been on your team and been coached by you, I know that you are deeply embedded in poetry, or poetry is deeply embedded in you.
Absolutely.
In terms of both forms and style and word choice as being so important to you, and having finally read something in print outside of the volume that we kind of put together, I see that you do know a lot of these forms and actually maneuver them pretty well. And I can recognize that it is one of those forms that I attempted to learn over the last couple of years,
Sure.
but can never remember the name of them. So I can at least see that. And I'm curious, what is kind of your background? What got you, what kind of, just kind of your background and how you got to knowing all these forms and kind of using them.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny because I have to sort of admit to I'm going to call it a childish vanity, perhaps. When I was young, I started writing poetry when I was around 12, 13 years old. My mom actually encouraged it. And that was, she was a visual artist herself who, quite frankly, I still am convinced should be hanging in the Guggenheim. She's incredibly talented.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Sure.
There is one poem in here, and I bet you I didn't mark it, that you say something about who I assume is that mom.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, wow, that is a fucking awesome mom. Like,
Right.
oh, yeah. Nothing worth dirtying your hands for.
Mhm.
The line is, Mama always said we were the best investment she ever made. And I thought to myself, fuck, what a great mom.
She was. It was, our relationship was always a little strange. We grew up in difficult situations, right? I mean, she was a single parent, and she was a non-traditional in terms of, her role as a woman in society. I used to laugh a lot because she'd say, I don't do no women's work. And she was a welder and a construction worker and these types of things, right? And so we actually, like, as we moved around a lot, trying to find, for her trying to find work, I got to really see firsthand the impact of this, this sort of masculine bravado patriarchal thing that happens because people wouldn't hire her. They wouldn't hire her because she was a woman. So you can't do construction work. What's wrong with you? Especially if she got older, right? And so we saw a lot of that. And we had a lot of very severe poverty and those types of things. But that was one thing she always did for me. She always had my back, and she always really encouraged the poetry, even when I know it was crappy.
And we all write shitty poetry.
It's how you start, right? And still to this day, absolutely have those poems. But no, she was really good about it. And I actually started off writing poetry because I wanted to write music originally. I wanted to be a songwriter. I wanted to be Roger Waters from Pink Floyd. Because I thought, wow, nobody writes human as well as Roger Waters does.
No.
His ability to say things. I mean, one of my favorite poetic phrases still to this day is a set of lines from the song The Final Cut, which is a lesser-known album by Pink Floyd and Roger Waters' last album. But he says in there, through the fish-eyed lens of tear-stained eyes, I can barely define the shape of this moment in time. Right? And I'm like, holy shit. 4 little lines just said everything I know about life.
Yeah.
And so that was really a lot of my inspiration early on. And so most of my early poems really were structured in that way, right? Not rhyming per se, although I did go through a phase with rhyming that, I often don't acknowledge. As much as I like to think the rhymes were not too obvious, but I was also a kid, so they probably were. But yeah, I was always really trying to get at this idea of musicality in verse, right? And then my mom would encourage me, and she'd say, what you're really good at, one of the things I see that you do well is imagery. This is something, for whatever reason, you know how to pick the certain, not necessarily expected things, but the things that evoke something in a scene and put them together. And that encouragement was really meaningful to me. And so I started pursuing that especially. Went through a brief phase of writing poetry for hire in high school until all the guys I knew, their girlfriends, caught on that they were getting poems written by me. Which caused a little bit of a stink. There was a little bit of a shitstorm. Small school too, so it was funny actually. And of course I was laughing. I was like, hey, I don't know, whatever. They asked me to write a poem, I did it. And if you want to hook up later, no, I'm just kidding. I will be the first to say poetry has still never gotten me a date.
Well, that sucks. That's what we all get into poetry
Right,
for.
I know. It's this common misconception still. That's his day. Maybe for some people, I don't know. But it certainly was a way to communicate some of those feelings at least, right? But yeah, no, I started doing that. And the funny thing is when I talk about the childish vanity, like as a young person, I refused to read other poetry. Because most of what I had read was like old Romantic era poetry or Shel Silverstein or these very rhyme heavy things, and I just didn't feel connected to any of those things. They weren't relevant to me at the time as a kid. And so I really kind of went around going, well, I don't need to read other people's poetry. I write my own poetry. It's my voice. Right? Like all this proud, cocky, stupid shit that I was doing. But in a way, it was kind of cool because I think it gave me a chance to sort of develop my voice really well before I started actually studying everything else. So in an interesting way, slam actually is what opened that door for me, though. I was taking a class here in town at CNM, a class that actually ended up being Jessica Helen Lopez, the local poet, who's previous former poet laureate and just all-around amazing writer. We both happened to be in that class together, and we had this teacher, Mary Moffett, who was really supportive and encouraging of our work, and she introduced us to slam. She kind of went, have you heard of this? And I went, well, I've heard some monosyllabic crap on PBS that was awful, you know, as the cat shat in the hat, mice hat. What the fuck are you talking about? And that was my impression of slam, so I wasn't really interested. But she challenged us, and she said, basically, you know, if you guys go to a slam, I'll give you extra credit. So go check it out. So we did. We went to the slam. Local scene, they had just won, Albuquerque had just won the National Poetry Slam, like months before. So it was a really huge, thriving time in the Albuquerque scene, poets everywhere, amazing poets, right? You know, you had Carlos Contreras and Joaquin Bellamy and you know, Lee Francis and this guy Tony Santiago, who I still to this day adore, and just all these great poets that were running around, you know, Damian Flores and all these people. They were so good. It was like, I was starstruck. I walked into the room and people were reading poetry that sounded kind of like mine, right? A little more narrative, a little more confessional, a little more like, this is just how I feel about shit. And I was immediately hooked. But it was the process of watching and listening to these poets do their thing night after night that made me stop and think, you know, actually I've been kind of an arrogant jackass all this time, and I need to study other people's work. If I really want to grow, if I really want to be this poet that I want to be, I need to know more about it, right? So it was actually then, when I was already, 26 years old, I think. No, I take it back. I was closer to 30. But either way,
You can say 20-something.
yeah, I was 20. I was 19, and very handsome. A lot of lies now. But, you know, after writing for so many years, I finally was like realizing that I needed to break through that barrier. So I started studying, and that really is where I started getting into it. And I was, you know, when I set my mind to a thing, I go kind of nuts about it. So I did. I started studying everything. I mean, my collection of poetry at home now is probably several hundred books.
Insane.
Yeah,
Like
it's
when
nuts.
we went and hung out with you just to practice and write for the group pieces. Yeah, like I would just sit there in between poems, or if it was a group duet and it was just Robin and Anna, I would just sit there and just like stand in awe. Like I didn't know there were that many books. But yeah.
No, it is. It's a great collection. I've been, you know, and the beautiful thing is like half of that is chapbooks that were published by poets who I've met across the country or the world. And then the other half, of course, are more traditional publications. But yeah, I mean, I went after it, and I still study, right? I mean, every time a poet catches my eye or ear, you know, some recent ones that come to mind at least were like Jamal May, is known as a slam poet, wrote this book called Hum that is absolutely astounding. Just blew my doors clean off. I was just like, holy shit, I want to write like this.
What was his name?
Jamal May, Jamaal, May. And, you know, so poets like that, poets like Rudy Francisco is a brilliant writer.
Yeah.
So in that slam arena, there are these poets who I obviously look up to. Buddy Wakefield, still one of my all-time idols. The guy just flabbergasts me. I still trying to be him someday, you know, or his shadow anyways. But, you know, but also the academic tradition, right? So, I mean, you know, Sharon Olds, Yusuf Komunyakaa, you know, Bob Hickok. Dear God, Bob Hickok is amazing. If you haven't read him, please, everybody who hears this ever, go out and buy some Bob Hickok. That's all I'm saying. I especially recommend Insomnia Diary. Is amazing. Really, his first 3 books are all absolutely stupendous. This is a poet who writes beautiful, sort of what we think of as academic poetry in a way, but it's a very unique voice. A lot of sardonic humor, a lot of sort of biting satire that sneaks its way in there, and just brilliantly constructed craft. I mean, absolutely stunning. I still have a dream of getting him to Albuquerque someday, really for entirely selfish reasons.
Which is why I started this podcast.
Right.
For entirely selfish reasons, so I could sit here and just be like, tell poetry to me.
Right. That's a fair point. Yeah, I don't know. It's been such a great journey learning to read and understand all these different forms. And I'm a big fan of scaffolding. So, when I see a poem that I really like, whoever wrote it, whether it's a sort of traditionally what we think of as a slam poet or spoken word artist, or a more academic poet, or somebody that's entirely created their own thing, I actually like to take the poems and then, put spaces between them, and then go in and write my own lines in between, and then erase the original poem.
Oh, wow.
And that's scaffolding, right? And it gives you this chance. There's a few different ways to do it, but artistically it gives you a chance to sort of explicate the poem, I guess, take it apart and look at how it's put together, but doing it in a way that's very active, right? Because you're inserting your own words in there. So you either are responding to the line before and trying to flow that into the next line so it feels organic, or you're writing in sort of a contrast to it, or again, multiple ways to do it. But it's a really neat way to sort of take those poems apart and look at the inner mechanisms a little bit, like you would take a clock apart, right? And look at all the gears and cogs, except those I would never be able to put back together. And those are not poems often that I publish or anything, of course, but that's more of an exercise I do for myself to just get a sense of familiarity with the structure, the music, the form, the internal meter, all those elements that we look at. So that's been a really helpful exercise for me too.
That's cool, because like I said, this is kind of the first time that I've had a chance to see, I guess, some of your page poems, and yeah, to actually see a lot of the forms that I don't know the names of, but know of, kind of come out, and now to hear that you're essentially a self-taught
Pretty
poet,
much, yeah.
outside of coachings and things like that,
Right.
But the forms and stuff, I assume, is a lot of self exploration stuff.
Pretty much, yeah. I've only ever taken one poetry class, and that was the one at C&M that I mentioned earlier. I don't know. I look back at Ray Bradbury, the sci-fi writer,
Yeah.
who I am wildly in love with. God, he was an amazing writer. He could say so much in the most simple language, right? Simple language, but it would just evoke so much. He'd describe a dandelion fluff skittering across the floor in an attic and imbue it with a sense of dread that made no sense at all, but worked, right? And so, he was self-taught. I mean, he always said that, I taught myself to write by going to the library and reading all day, every day of my life, and so that is sort of a similar path that I took with the writing poetry. Because I didn't, in some ways, care for sort of, well, I'm going to be honest. I didn't care for the structure of some classes that I've seen in sort of from a third-person view, I guess. I'm less interested in trying to determine what a poet was saying as I am in how they said it, right? So these sort of ongoing conversations of, well, I think the poet meant this. There's value in that. I'm not denying that at all. But as somebody who's been writing a really long time, I also know that it's very easy to misinterpret what an author's saying. Sometimes they just said it because it sounded cool, right?
Yeah.
or it was just like, ooh, aha moment, right? So it doesn't always have these sort of deeper meanings we like to attribute. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's a subconscious thing. Those are fun conversations, but I'm really more interested in how did he do that? How did he make me feel this way? Because those are the poems I love. If a poem doesn't move me, on the page or the stage, then it's not a poem for me, right? I mean, I don't mean that it's not a poem. For me, it's not one I'm going to take home, is what I'm saying.
And that's great to hear, because I know, at least for me, a lot of times, and this is partly why I kind of created this podcast the way I did, of having just about everybody. So I have performance poets, I have classically trained poets, because there's a gap, and two, I felt like I was also one of those people who, I love poetry, and of course my introduction was slam poetry. I didn't write poems as a kid,
Right.
And then I figured, well, I'm so into this poetry stuff, I should start reading some of the the good ones, and
Right.
I'm using big air quotes for those who can't see, which is everybody except me and Zach. But so like Emily Dickinson, I don't know why, but it just almost none of them do anything for me. Every once in a while, I find one short one. I was like,
Right.
that one was pretty cool. For the same reason, I think one, I don't like to tear it apart in that way,
Right.
and now I've started to find some that kind of do an amazing bridging of the gap. Like I finally was introduced to Tanea Winder,
nice.
who I've been trying to get on. We've scheduled a few times to come in, but she is, I think in January she was in 4 states,
I believe
like
it.
just all over the place. But she was the first classically trained poet that I just enjoyed because she uses those forms in a very classic manner, but still manages to kind of make it readable. And I was blown away by being able to find something that worked in both. Like I didn't have to feel like I was being talked down to because you read the poem and you're like, I have no idea what this said, so it must be good.
Right.
And I've struggled
Right.
with that.
Understandable. Yeah. It still happens. I'm fascinated by that because it seems to still happen in publication circles a lot. I'm convinced that some editors actually make their selections that way. And I don't mean to insult anybody by any means, but you think we were talking earlier, and that was one of the things that came up is like having that poem published where you're like, hey, they published my poem, and 2 months later or whatever, you look back and you go, oh Jesus, oh my God, they published that.
It really was.
People can
I don't
see it.
even know what it's. I don't know what it said, and I wrote it.
Right. And the ones that you love sometimes, like, nobody will take, right? Nobody will bite them. And you're like, but you don't understand. This is this brilliantly crafted thing I did. Look at what... and they're taking the one about an alien staring in a window while you're having Thanksgiving dinner. And it's like, what the hell?
It really is that.
So it's fascinating. But no, I love that. I mean, to me, that's what makes a poem come alive is, so I get it, right? I'm the same. I don't really... all due respect to those authors, Robert Frost and Dickinson, all these, very accomplished poets. But yeah, same thing. They don't really do a lot for me. I just don't connect with them in the same way, Although, to be fair, like Dylan Thomas is still one of my favorites. I mean, so it's all about what gets you, right? What hits you at the heart. Yusuf Komanyaka saying things like, now that I've beaten your ghost back into your body like a drum, rise like a panther and walk away. And it's like, holy shit, what just happened? Those are the things that move me. So, I think as a writer, that's what I'm always trying to do. I mentioned Hickok, Bob Hickok, and I think of him as the master of the last line because he writes these poems that are great, and then so often he'll have a lot of lines throughout the poem where you actually have to stop and react out loud, and you're like, holy shit, what? Wait, somebody come look at this. Wait, who's somebody?
Gotta write this down.
Right? I need to show, knocking on the neighbor's door. Dude, look. Of course, they're going, what the fuck is that? But he has this way of ending poems in such a powerful and succinct way that you're just like, holy shit, it all came home. Oh my God, I need to sit and meditate a minute. Let me think. And those are both the things that I want to read and the things that I want to write if I can, right?
Yeah.
By no means does that always happen, but when it does, it feels great, right?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So it's been a little while. How about another poem?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking I might share a little bit shorter one.
Absolutely.
I've been working for the last 2 years on 2 manuscripts, actually. One is called Wrestle the Ash, and one is called Bullets and Other Misplaced Affections. Bullets is sort of a collection of poems about growing up on the streets, basically being kind of a young Irish kid growing up in a neighborhood full of gang violence, and trying to figure out how to not only make your place in that, but literally survive. Very much a part of my young experiences. And then Wrestle the Ash is more a collection of, more like these other books, more just a collection of poems that I have kind of accumulated and built. And so if I can get this thing to actually work, I was going to share one of those. I'm going to acknowledge that I am holding my phone right now. I don't care for watching people read poetry holding their phone, but since nobody can see me,
You'll just announce that.
I'll just make announcements. Yes. Yeah. Let's edit. No, I'm just kidding.
Too late. It's in.
Oh, damn. There's a few in here, though, that I really like. And there was one that I was kind of, getting ready and thinking about what would I like to share. There's a couple of these really sort of stood out for me. I'll spare you some of the more ridiculous ones. It's a strange collection. There are poems in here about stabbing a screwdriver through my hand, and going to the hospital where I met a woman who had her ear bitten off.
Wow.
True story. And the poem is really ridiculous because I talk about thinking about asking her out while we're both sitting there bleeding. So that one actually got published as well. So, like I said, it's an interesting world. This one's a little bit different. It's called A Theory of Strings, and it's about connection. So
Nice.
I'll leave it at that. The movement of light makes it mostly invisible to us. The way our dull bodies darken its face, we become eager as ravens to gather reflection, invite light to embolden our bodies, to spill and add dimension to our forms. Listen, there's a reason our homes have windows designed like eyes. Closed, each image that passes before them a dream. Objects are closer than they appear. The woman whose face studies the caution sign as if eager to marry the idea, spend the rest of her life nestled with this mantra, caution, as if the world were extraordinary, as if the possibility of danger lay inside every bunt cake, flock of birds, the sweat of a man jogging with who knows what disease on his lips, as if every conversation were a risk. Maybe it is. We do not know if the world is stuck on one channel, whether shadows spend their day at our desks plotting insurrection. Maybe these daily routines of yoga, karaoke in the car, small talk, make all of us actors, texting this day's script to our friends. We try to move faster than sound. Love poems, emoticons, the soundtrack of wounded hearts up and down the scales, every emotion is given a song. The heart still throbs, still files court orders with our clocks, summons us to appear each day before family, the lover, the boss. How small one life is compared to the distance of a star. The sun will explode before we have crossed half the space between us. The immeasurable light a single breath caresses in its life, enough to paint the galaxy twice, set fire to the atmosphere. The same light we touch with our eyes on waking touches perhaps another you 15 million parsecs from here. Life here? A trick of the light. The visible spectrum of you, broken into carbon atoms, reassembled in bathroom mirrors, you, I, comparing our fingers with that other we in the glass. Maybe life, maybe living is a risk. If gravity gives us the freedom to move across worlds as the light bends between us, what is the risk? The opportunity to connect to another us, worse, another human being entirely? To let the light walk through us at an atomic level, carry DNA from one man's elbow, pollinate the skin of another with a touch so small, it's like it never happened at all.
Nice. That was a good ending. I appreciate that. That was awesome.
Thank you.
And I think I say this at least once per episode, that it takes all of my energy not to be snapping in the middle of poems. So I don't want to interrupt. Need a moment.
Fair
Okay. So kind of back to your book.
Mhm.
And so there's a poem towards the end called Storm Warning.
Ah, yes.
And this is when I hate to talk about poems because I fear that I misinterpret things. But that's the joy of poetry.
Yes, it is.
So a lot of it seems almost, I hate to use the phrase finger pointing at someone else being at fault for a lot of the issues in the that's brought up in the poem, and it's another poem about family. But it was the end that kind of caught me and kept me, because it almost reads like there's a hesitation that, yeah, maybe all that stuff is true, but that in the end, now that everything's said and done, I'm the one that's holding shit back. And one, if you're comfortable with it, letting me know whether or not I'm reading that right. Two, chat about that poem a little, because I did. It was one of the few in here where, I kind of I'm at work reading it during my lunch hour, and I kind of cried a little bit.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
And it's towards the end, 94. If you're, no, you found it.
Yeah, I remember this one actually really well. So first of all, thank you. I appreciate it. This was a poem. Actually, it's funny, when I wrote it, I intended it to be a poem that I would slam with. Not that I write poems for slam, but after I wrote it, I went, I like this one. I want to share it. But there's a lot of hard stuff in it, and I wasn't really sure how it would be received. But I think, you're reading it pretty much entirely right. One of the themes that I write to a lot, especially in this collection, is this idea that as children, we may go through any number of difficult experiences, right? Trauma, just difficult life, bad choices, you name it, all those things that we do as young people. And most of my life, I did carry a lot of resentments. I'll share that, for myself, I've been in recovery now for 18 plus years, from drug and alcohol use and from, some mental health experiences as well.
And seriously, congratulations on 18 years, dude.
Thank you.
I've said it before, but I needed to say it on air.
No, I appreciate it. I really do. It's very true for me to say I never thought that would happen. Then again, I also, in these young years, didn't think I would live to be 20 years old because of the streets I was living on. So it's been a stunning journey. But one big part of that is the accountability, right? Accountability is a word I can't say, but but very much a central sort of pillar in my life, because it's one of the most important things in my recovery. And that means that a lot of the writing that I do focuses on that. When I was young, I wrote a lot of poems about suicide. I wrote a lot of poems that started off with, basically I'm going to kill myself in this, that, or the other way. But all those poems would end up on a positive note. Like I would talk myself out of it through the process of writing, right? That was part of my healing therapy, if you will. So I'd start off, I'm going to jump off a cliff, and by the end I'd be like, you know what? Fuck it. Life's not that bad. Whatever. I'll keep going. Screw it. And now that's sort of shifted, and a lot of the writing I do now talks about those resentments and those things that we carry with us in life. And, I never want to be too didactic or too heavy-handed, but I always want to sort of incorporate this element of, forgiveness, acceptance. These are keys. And when we can practice those things, then we can heal ourselves and sometimes relationships. Of course, that's a two-way street, so not always. But I think it's really important. And this poem very much is about that. It's funny because I wrote this poem at the individual World Poetry Slam. I take it back. I'm sorry. It was the National Poetry Slam. I was there with the team, the Albuquerque team that year. And I have a tendency to wander off and go find places to sit quietly and meditate.
I know that by experience
right.
now.
And it's a process, right? And I had found this amazing soul food restaurant. And I went in and ordered this soul food. And I'm just eating all this catfish and cornbread and beans and everything. It was just amazing. And the waitress actually had come up, and she goes, what you doing? And I said, well, I'm writing a poem. And she goes, really? So she starts reading it over my shoulder.
Oh, no.
And I'd gotten about 4 or 5 stanzas in. And she's like, damn, that's pretty good. All right. And she walked off, and I was just like, wow, okay, well, I don't normally let people see the poems until they're done.
Yeah.
But it was kind of nice to get that encouragement. And she ended up kind of working her way in an indirect way into the poem as well, because it just felt right at that time. But yeah, so it definitely it is. It's a poem that's very much about this idea of, the symbolism of omens and how, you feel. I feel like often in our lives we think, we can read the future and it's going to be this way. And interestingly to me, when we do that, it's always something negative, right? It's kind of like those what if questions. You never go, what if I win the lottery tomorrow? Wouldn't that be cool? It's like, what if I get hit by a truck and my body lays at the side of the road and no one ever picks it up?
Wow, that got dark
real fast. So I don't know. It's a fascinating thing that we do to ourselves sometimes, or maybe I should say at least for myself. So a lot of that poem is definitely about these ideas of omens and predicting the future and those heavy weights that we carry, and then letting go, right, and realizing. I mentioned at the end it talks about waiting for the house to slide down the hill. Yeah. And that's a movement thing for me. One of my favorite elements in poetry is movement. as an actual element of the poem itself, right? We move a lot when we do performance poetry, if we happen to be on a stage, or even maybe when we're reading those page poems because of our sort of training having come up in that, right?
Yeah.
But I'm always interested in how does the movement affect the poem internally, right? And so that was another element of that poem. So now I'm explicating my own poem. I'm sorry.
No,
that was a little too much.
No, that's kind of why I bring them up, and why we bring it up in the first place. And I don't know if there's much else I wanted to chat about the book itself, other than the title piece. And that one caught me off guard, because it's towards the end, and the title being "Some of it is muscle" is buried in towards the end of the poem, and it almost doesn't feel like a line that stands out. But when I read it, I was like, oh, that's the title piece. So I read it a few more times, and it was like, because some of it is muscle, I took to be all this kind of like, it meant something like, I don't want to say important, but like impressive and like deep, and in all honesty, when you read that poem, yeah, there's an element of that, but there's an element of almost fun and almost a recognition that I'm not what I'd like to be, sort of thing. So talk about the title.
Okay. No, thank you so much for saying that, actually, because that actually means a lot to me. And you're dead on. That's exactly kind of where I was coming from. In the poem Training Day is a poem about my oldest son, and this idea, he's a very masculine type guy, right? He's very, he's young, and he's in that phase of his life where he's all about, I'm going to be strong and badass and, all this. And he's a sweet kid, but he still has, that part of his personality. And so the poem is kind of about that idea of like how we relate to one another as opposed to how I might relate with the other children. Periodically, I've tried to keep sort of a scrapbook for my children over the years in poetry, like writing poems for them every so often over the years, with the idea that eventually I'd give them a collection of poems that was, this is your life in verse, right?
That's awesome.
I really, really wanted to do that. And so some of these poems in here are from that, right? And this being one of them. But yeah, when I get to that part of the poem, it talks about, he's 120 pounds of lean muscle. I'm 240. Some of it is muscle. It's this definitely this joke, but also the reason that I picked that as the title for the book is that's very much how I see all of these poems and much of the work that I do. People have commented a lot over the years of, I love how strong you are and how fierce you can be sometimes, but also how vulnerable at other times. And I sort of guess, at least in the spoken word arena, sort of developed this reputation for writing these really strong, really fierce, like, you can't bring me down poems, which I appreciate, and certainly that's an element of it. But there's this great meme that floats around on Facebook sometimes. I posted it once on my page because it's like the epitome of who I am, at least as I see myself, right? And it's this little meme, shows a picture of a lion, and it says, the only problem with being strong is nobody ever asks if you're okay, right? And that's what a lot of these poems are. It's like, my whole life people have seen me as strong, and a lot of that is trauma response, right? Grow up with certain experiences, you learn to develop certain defense mechanisms. And then growing up on the streets, I never was a person who enjoyed fighting. Like, I always hated fighting. But because we moved so often, because I was the new kid so often, because I have red hair and a name that sounds like a chicken, I got teased a lot, right? Kluckman, which only got worse when they started calling crackheads Clucks. That was a whole other experience. But so needless to say, I got teased a lot. Which I didn't mind the teasing so much, but it seemed like there was always some bully in the school that wanted to fight with me or my sister or somebody else who I thought of as being unable to defend themselves. And so I would get in these fights a lot. I would take a lot. I would take a lot before I would get to the point of violence. But once that line was crossed, I would fight back, and it was always in my mind. It was always this: will you leave me alone now, please? Can we be done? And so. I share that to say that I also had developed this reputation on the streets as somebody who would throw down and, kick your ass, quote unquote, whatever, if I had to, right? And so when I was putting this collection together, a lot of the poems talk about some of those experiences, but I'm very much this idea that no matter how strong we are, no matter how capable we've learned to be in our own self-care, or what we may call self-care sometimes mistakenly, there's always this vulnerable part of us, this inner child, right? This person that's still yearning to just be like, at the end of the day, people think of me as this, tough guy, and I'm fairly large, so people, make comments on that and stuff a lot. And I don't mind any of that. But I also want people to understand, that at heart, I'm a Pisces, right? Like, I'm a guy who wears his emotions on his sleeves. I cry at every Disney movie, even the bad ones.
Inside Out, dude. Start to finish.
Gosh, right? All the way.
Start to finish.
All the way. Fox and the Hound still kills me. Just wrecks me every time I watch it. But they were friends. What's going on? Just breaks my damn heart. And I feel everything so deeply, right? The emotional side of me feels everything deeply. Pain, hurt, resentment, love, whatever it is. It's magnified. I don't know if that's the Pisces or the poet, but
both, I think.
Probably. But I just want to always acknowledge that duality, right? Like, no matter how tough you are, no matter how strong you are, no matter how much you're fighting for yourself or other people, at the end of the day, I think we all hurt, and we all have these days when we just want to curl up in a ball and go, I just wish there was somebody that would come up and put their arms around me and sing a lullaby or tell me it's going to be okay, or, fucking, I don't know, rent a Jim Carrey movie or something, something to just be like, you're not alone, right? Yeah. And so those are parts of my sort of, my mental health experience as well, right? I've wrestled most of my life with these ideas of loneliness, and not both as a result of moving so much and sort of these different experiences. I mean, at 9, I made a conscious decision to stop making friends because we moved so often.
Wow, at 9.
At 9, yeah. I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, every time we go somewhere new, I meet people, I make friends, and then I break my heart when we leave again. So fuck it, I'm done. And I did that for like 15 years, really, until I was damn near in my 20s. I actually effectively tried to close my emotions off. Like, I made a conscious effort to try to not feel anything. Needless to say, people that do that, there's an anger, as far as I'm concerned, there's one emotion you can't get rid of, and that's that anger, right? Yeah. The more closed off you are, the more angry you get. And so I think that's a part of this as well, this idea that, people will see us as poets and writers in any number of ways, because it is such a beautifully subjective art form. And no matter how we communicate with people, they're going to personalize it in a way that makes sense to them. And that's the beauty of it. That's the grace of it. I love that. But sometimes I think I just want to sort of say too, like, it's okay if you're reading this book or books like it. It's okay to also acknowledge that you hurt. It's okay to acknowledge that, you're not always strong. Some of it's muscle. Some of it is other.
No, that's awesome. And it was weird because, through the entire book, I actually read the headline, the title as some of it is muscle memory, and I don't know why. It's just throughout the whole thing until I got to that line, and I was like, that is not where I thought that title was going. But it's really cool the way you explained it, so thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, before I ask you to do one or two more, I know you're working on stuff and we can't talk about it, and I'm cool, but I want everybody to know that there is really cool shit happening.
Yes.
In Zach's kind of background stuff until it happens with some other poets. But you did want to mention, and I am glad you are going to, about Buddy Wakefield again and his coming to town.
Yes, yeah. I definitely want to let people know who, might be in the area that, we have Buddy Wakefield coming through. He's going to be here on March 29th over at the Source. And it's going to be kind of an interesting night. It's going to be a little more intimate than, his shows sometimes are, in the sense that the space is a little smaller. It's outdoors. We're going to light it up and keep it almost like it's an evening with Buddy, right? So it's this very sort of casual, intimate night. But I think it's really, it's something I want to encourage people to come and see if they haven't, especially if you haven't seen Buddy. If you've already seen him, I feel like you're probably going to come because you've had your life changed. But if you haven't, especially, I want to encourage it, because this guy, in my mind, is just like at an apex. He's an apex poet, right? And I mean that in a non-predatory way, of course. I just mean he is reached this pinnacle of both writing and performance that is, in my mind, damn near unparalleled. He's got this fluid performance style that's just very, sometimes the poem flows into the dialogue and into the next poem so smoothly that you're just enraptured, and you don't even, if you were asked to stop and identify where things changed, like, you might have trouble, right? And it's so beautifully fluid and organic, and he's just got, he writes beautifully, beautiful metaphor, beautiful turns of phrase, very, very clever wordplay, and all of that combined with this performance style that's just immaculate. So for me personally, he's an icon. He's somebody who I look to and still say, like, I want to be that when I grow up, and acknowledging, of course, that we all are our own people and everything, but there's so much in his style that I want to copy. And I feel like when I've hosted him before in town, one of the things I always hear from people afterwards is just this, like, absolute joy. Like, people come out of a Buddy Wakefield show enthralled and happy and so glad they were there. And that's what I feel like poetry should be, right? Yeah. So often poetry shows are, and it's not a criticism, I do it myself, obviously, but so often there's this dark, all this dark, heavy topic and theme stuff going on. But something about Buddy, even when he talks about the hard stuff, you come out of there like, wow, it's almost a spiritual experience in a weird way. It's so positive, right? So anyway, yeah, I'm excited to have him coming through again. It's always a real thrill to me to see him again in totally selfish ways, because I get to sit there and be like, oh my God, it's Buddy. I get to see it again. But no, yeah, it's so we've got the tickets are available through holdmyticket.com. It's coming up. It's on a Thursday, and it'll be a a very intimate evening. And I think a really neat way for people to get to connect with Buddy in a way that maybe they haven't necessarily at some of the previous shows. And he only gets through here about every couple, maybe 3 to 5 years because of his tour schedule. So it's kind of a rare event as well.
Yeah, and I'm excited for it just because, one, I finally made it to the source I guess it's still this week. And it's super cute, really small, intimate spot, kind of perfect for that sort of thing. And also because when you were helping Anna, myself, just part of the Rumble Room team, that dude, you would not stop talking about that motherfucker at all. So it's going to be really cool to finally see him in person, because I think most of the stuff that you find online of his is audio only. Yeah, so I to see his performance, and when you talk about him, the person that comes to my mind is Will Gibson. Oh yeah, because at least the first time I saw him was the first time I saw like one of those sorts of performance features where there's parts where you're just like wow, and then you realize I don't think some of that was part of the poem. Like Exactly. He just stops mid poem, talks, comes back, and I don't know if it's intentional or how that plays out, but so that I'm super stoked to see him finally.
Absolutely. No, and Will is an amazing poet as well. So very similar style and performance. So I think you'll enjoy that.
So then, one or two more from you, and
sure.
Then we'll skedaddle.
Sounds good. Let me see. I had one of the hardest things, and I bet you can attest to this as well, is trying to decide what to read. Yeah. Sometimes, so I came overly prepared, as I often do. It's funny, when I used to back when I started doing features and tours, which I'm getting ready for a couple of those again now myself, actually, awesome. in the coming year. But used to be when I would get ready for tours, I would prepare like 30 poems, all of them memorized, all of them ready to go, and then I would go and be like, okay, I've got all these poems. I used to prepare for the slams the same way, like the city championships and stuff. I'd have 14, 15 poems ready. So I want to advocate, please never do that to yourself, ever, God willing, don't do that. It's a horrid experience. It makes it impossible. So I tried to limit myself a little bit more today. So I thought I would read a brand new poem.
Ooh,
actually.
New shit.
It's a new one. I think it's finished, but you know how that goes. It may not be. I may change my mind in a week. I'll probably hate the poem in a week anyways, because that seems to be the process. But every once in a while you write about those things that really are very, very important to you. And, more recently I've actually been broaching some of the mental health side of things. It was something that, to be honest, I was sort of shy about, like, approaching as directly for a long time. So I've been writing about that more, and one of my experiences is depression. You know, depression's been a big factor in my life. And actually, it's interesting because these days I don't experience it as much or as often, and certainly not the same way, you know, as opposed to the 2 weeks curled in the fetal position I used to spend.
Yeah.
Now it's more hit or miss, and I have the tools to work through it. So, you know, I'm definitely a fan of those things. But nonetheless, I wanted to write this poem, and it incorporates a sort of a strange metaphor, I'll be honest, but hopefully it works. So y'all be nice. It's called Jellyfish. When I say I've been alone my whole life, I have to admit that's not entirely true. To be fair, I don't remember my birth, but I suspect I swam with the jellyfish while still in her womb. The depression, my twin, is one of them, all soft skin, invisible, and capable of great pain. The story goes, the day I was born, all 8 pounds 4 ounces of alone, the nurses struck mute gathered around my mother's bed. She said, in awe of my beauty, I wonder if she meant they didn't notice my fists, how they were clenched even then, or if their eyes were drawn to the floor, absent my form. They say, medical miracle. I say, little boy born with no shadow. Who could blame them? Invisible as I was, my body now an empty space for my mother to cup her hands around. My birth made her a mime. Mute tongue for a heart. They could not find my pulse the first time. Diagnosis, murmur. They told my mother I would grow out of this, but the hole in the heart where the jellyfish live was not my last diagnosis. Like my heart, I am proficient in silence, but have no rhythm. Probably why I dance like a broken phone, all stutter step and shuttered view. Lonely is the way my bones ring when the tide comes in. When a room full of people become inexplicably blind, I disappear, all 300 pounds of me, because I do not please the eye. My words hurt. I guess this makes me the elephant. I say lonely when I mean depressed. Unable to build relationships most take for granted. On good days, I can drive my body to work, shake hands, smile a little, speak the words. On bad days, my body is an origami letter folded in fetal position. A newborn crane whose shell has been shattered and eaten by my invisible twin. I don't know if I mean the same thing that you do when I say the word depression. I mean, the more you love me, the longer it will take for you to leave. But you will. I mean alone. So many have been angry with me. Selfish, unreliable, flaky. I want to tell them I would like nothing more than to meet you for coffee, hike the foothills, be anywhere but my own skin, but I was born to swim in the blue. Some are gifted with friends, relationships. Some, like me, don't know how, can't understand the rules because they were written by people who don't know how hard it is to get out of bed when your head is a shipwreck, when your body is more weight than an ocean can lift. I do not want to be dead, just some days I feel like I already am. To the people who have given me up because depression is this abusive relationship I have with my skin, who are more comfortable with people that don't require so much patience to know I get it. Every new person I meet comes with an expiration date. Most don't make it 2 years. If you have, thank you. You are a miracle. If depression is a jellyfish, then I am Jonah trying to swallow the whale in my throat and gain a fish-eyed perspective because I am tired of drowning, and this time I want to save myself.
Yeah, and I have to say, one, I really like this one.
Thank you.
It's not the first time I've read it, at least.
Right.
Because Anna, Robin, and I, and you have kind of stayed in touch, and
Yeah.
I feel guilty because I didn't get back to you on the second iteration of it.
That's okay.
But yeah, no, that one hit, and I have to say the abusive relationship part of depression has been on my mind a lot, and I've been tinkering with that concept as well. So thank you for sharing that. Seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
So then, anything else?
No, I mean, I just, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a good time.
Oh, it really was, and I'm really glad that you came on. One, I now have the baseball card set
Nice.
of Rumble Room.
There you
Rumble
go.
Room. Yeah, so then at this point, our icebreakers.
Sure.
This time, again, I think I keep going back to the haiku, but we did a haiku each. And do you want to go first or second?
I'll go second.
All right. And Zach wrote a bunch of them because that is how Zach is. So if you want to read them all, that is absolutely fine.
Okay.
But I only wrote one because I am a lazy poet. So mine is, the cock wakes early, takes charge of morning stirrings, goes limp by supper.
I love that. Oh my God, I love that. Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to steal that one later and put my name on it. No, I'm
That's
kidding.
okay.
I'm kidding. All right. Well, I did get a little carried away. It's true. Surprised myself a little. I'll do just 3 of them because they're all different styles, so why not?
Cool.
The rain in my hair, her breath in memory's voice, a longed for return. Second one, more natural. The clouds kiss the moon. Sun is a jealous lover. Dawn argues for peace. And then this last one because fuck this motherfucker. If Trump continues to represent the oranges, the fruits will spoil soon.
Nice.
I could do a whole hour on why that motherfucker needs to be out of office, but I think most of us could.
Everybody could. It's true. Dude, seriously, you have really been like a brother to me since I met you, so thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank
Seriously.
you. That means a lot to me, and the feeling is mutual. Absolutely.
I want to thank my guest Zachary Kluckman again. Zach is one of those poets that bridges the gap between performance and traditional poetry so well. Not only that, but he is a great coach and a loving individual. I could not have had or even asked for a better first slam team experience. Zachary Kluckman's work can be found all over the place, and he has at least 3 books that you can find online: Per City Poems, Animals in Our Flesh, and Some of It is Muscle. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a review. That's how people find us, and that's how the algorithms work. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay safe.